Last year, in what I call a lapse in judgment, I decided it would be a great idea for me to go back and play what, in my opinion at least, was every genre-defining MMORPG in chronological order. Now, these days it seems impossible to even bring up the topic of MMOs without hearing that the genre is either dying or that it's just not the same as it used to be. In fact, I was almost hesitant in doing this challenge at all because I was afraid of how sour the topic can become within its very own fan base. On the contrary, what I found was massive, immersive worlds with passionate yet sometimes dwindling communities, thousands of hours of varying content, and hard work seemingly lost to the sands of time, and most importantly, a newfound enjoyment and understanding of the genre that I had fallen deeply in love with so many years ago. Now, I am not new to the genre. I've been playing MMOs for over 20 years. I understand how complex these games can be and that you can't simply just log in and decide if it's fun or not within a couple of hours. So I knew before I started that I needed to set some rules to be as fair as possible. First, the game needed to be free to play, or at least have some form of trial. I also needed to start a fresh character, because let's be honest, I've played a lot of these games already, and if we're gonna go in and judge them fairly at all, I needed to start fresh and maybe see what some other players would see at the beginning of the game. I also needed to organize my thoughts. I needed to make a list. I would not add or remove any games from the list. I would then list the games in the order that they were released and then play them in that order. My only level of critique I would give them, at least initially, is did I play them and did I continue to play them after rule number 4 was met? Rule number 4 being each game needed to, at the very minimum, have 5 hours of gameplay. Now, I know you can't judge an MMO on this amount of gameplay, or at least not fully. You are given so many qualifiers early on though: art, quality of the launcher, the music, graphics, basic combat, and even movement. Luckily, I was not going into this planning on making a tier list or even rating the games fully, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. Shoot, I didn't even initially plan on making this video at all. I just wanted to see what I missed from the genre and hopefully find out where it all went wrong. So with all 30 of the games listed out and my research completed, it was time to finally get down to business. Did some stretches, sat down, and hit that scary go live button. We began our journey with an old classic, Ultima Online. Set in the Ultima universe, Ultima Online was known for its extensive player versus player combat system and sandbox world. Since its initial release in 1997, the game has seen numerous expansions and updates. I logged in and made what, in my opinion, was the most gorgeous undead mohawk ninja imaginable, and the game crashed. I lost my character. Not the best start, probably. Only 10 minutes in and the game was showing its age. So we logged back in, remade our character, set up the UI, key bindings, and settings, something that can take even close to an hour in some of these older MMOs, and we started playing. One thing you may notice right away is that the game is lacking in the graphics department, and while it may be initially jarring, it was something I would continue to see in some of the future games. Graphics, while being potentially a visual turnoff, are not something that would take away my immersion within these virtual worlds. There was something else there, and at this point, so early on, I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was that really made me enjoy them. So after messing around in the town, I picked up some quests and went off to the nearby zombie-infested town to start grinding away and begin my exploration. 30 minutes into grinding and trying to figure out why I was stuck being a rat, I was spotted by Tertius from the guild Epic. He asked me if I was new and gave me some tips. He would continue to come back periodically to check in on me and my progress, something I found to be quite generous and lacking within a more modern MMO that I've grown accustomed to, at least. After fighting off the zombie infestation for a few hours, gearing up, avoiding the void of death, I decided to travel out into the greater world and see what more the world had to offer. Found a cave with a llama, and like any sane person, I killed it, putting it out of its misery, of course. One thing I couldn't get out of my head was the fact that I felt like if only had 5 friends to play, this game would actually be pretty fun, even given its age. I didn't need an MMO with millions of daily users, but a small group of dedicated fans could really make any MMO fun. Ended up being less about the game's combat, graphics, or anything else so arbitrary, and more about the people you explored them with. I would eventually find out this was not always the case in some of the other MMOs further down on the list. Unfortunately, destroying any bright-eyed childlike innocence I may have had going in while playing Ultima. I finished up my session by exploring some higher level dungeons. I was definitely not prepared for, and seeing if I could find some players within the cities. It was exciting to see player cities and homes littered across the map and gave a sense of life to the world that would become mostly empty otherwise. I did end up seeing a few players scattered around, or so I thought, but I think most of them were either AFK or just NPCs, and I couldn't tell the difference. At this point, I had hit my 5-hour mark, and I felt like I had kind of seen all I needed to from Ultima Online. So I shut down my PC and decided to prep myself for one of the largest MMORPGs ever. One that I had unfortunately never had the opportunity to play in my past, but would become one of the pillars that nearly all future MMORPGs would be built upon. Of course, I'm talking about the original Everquest. Now, like I said, I never got the chance to play Everquest while growing up, so to say I felt excited to check out this classic would be a massive understatement. Everquest would continue the trend of clunky interfaces, though Everquest did veer from Ultima in the fact that it was a fully 3D third-person MMORPG. Everquest also did something different than Ultima that I was not fully expecting. It grabbed me in a way that I wasn't completely sure was possible anymore. Exploring the world, its dungeons, and not knowing what was to come around each corner gave me a sense of wonder I wasn't sure I was capable of any longer. To put it plainly, I felt like a noob, and I was loving every second of it. Other players would pass me while exploring the starting areas, vast spider-filled dungeons, making the world feel alive. I was truly having a great time. I even decided to log out of my bard and make another tune, a Shadow Knight, that I would continue to play for the rest of the playthrough. Eventually, I would gear up enough that I felt like I was strong enough to leave the starter area and explore what the rest of the world of Norath had to offer. I was definitely not ready. After dying and starting back in the starting area a few times, I was eventually comfortable enough to fully leave. And what I found was the world was immersive, and 29 expansions later felt like it truly had endless amounts of content to enjoy. At the end of the stream, I logged out, had a quick snack, and rushed back to my PC. Off stream, I upgraded my account to full paid status and continued to play Everquest for the next month. I'd leveled my Shadow Knight up quite a bit, did as much as I could as any solo player. I ultimately quit playing because I ran out of content I could do alone and didn't have any friends to play with. Everquest was really a great experience, but at the end of the day, it forced the reality that MMOs are about who you play with, and at least in my opinion, not only about the games themselves. Our next game is kind of an interesting one for me, as it is the first MMORPG that I personally ever played. I remember getting the game as if it was yesterday. I was at the mall picking out shoes from Zoomies with my frosted tipped hair, and I was able to convince my mother to stop by the GameStop on our way out. Looking through the aisles, there was a game whose box art really stood out to me. Not knowing how much of an impact this would have on the rest of my life, I begged my mother to buy it for me. At this point, I didn't even know that the game was online, even though it was in the title. I for sure didn't know what an MMO was. So once I got home, I ran back to my room and began to install the game. Now, it needed a patch. So I turned on the dial-up internet, of which my parents surely interrupted multiple times during the update, and eventually got into the game that would ruin any hope for the future of this little blue-eyed rat boy. And now we flash forward to today. Logging into Anarchy Online felt like meeting up with an old girlfriend. However awkward it felt, there was still a sense of comfort as I heard the starting music play through my headphones. Anarchy Online has, at least since my initial playing at 13, seen many updates. Unfortunately, it has not seen much of any new content in the last 10 years and is really on its last leg in my opinion. So I didn't expect to see anyone playing. And I was right. I played through the new player experience and don't think I saw anyone for the first hour or so. But this would all change as I left the newbie area and made my way to the large hub town. I was greeted by an active and almost bustling city full of players running around and enjoying their Nottingham-field life. I made my way into the subway to continue my journey as more and more dedicated players will trickle into my stream, most of which greeted me warmly and offered to help me within the game. Not knowing the experience I already had in Anarchy Online, of course, I eventually made my way back to town where a player by the name of XXXDude XXX would help equip a full set of gear and even helped me acquire new weapons, like the real Chad that he was. After this, a full group would join me from my stream and we would continue to conquer the dungeon known as the Temple of Three Winds. The community in AO, still small, was also very passionate about this game, even with its lack of updates, content, and the ever-looming potential for a server shutdown. Dark Age of Camelot was released at the end of 2001. The game combines Arthurian lore, Norse mythology, and Irish Celtic legends with high fantasy. It is set in the period after King Arthur's death, when his kingdom was split into 3 realms, which are in a constant state of war with each other. This would set up the game to be one of the first realm versus realm MMORPG, focusing strongly on its faction warfare. Unlike the previous games, Dark Age of Camelot left my chat feeling empty. For the first 4 hours, I was not greeted by a single player in the game. Instead, I was met with what seemed to be the beginning of the cookie-cutter gather and kill quests we would see so commonly in modern MMORPGs. Even exploring into the realm versus realm zones, I found very few players and a lack of exciting content. PvP-based MMOs live and die by their communities, and with most of the Deox community moving to private servers due to massive failures from the original developers, and those private servers currently being between seasons and down, the world just felt completely empty and lifeless. I don't want to talk too poorly about Deox because I have heard some stories about how great it really can be, and I know for a fact that it has inspired many games like Guild Wars 2 with its realm vs. realm system. Sadly though, at this point it felt empty and cold. The first game on this list I started to feel like was just completely abandoned by its community. After 5 hours within the game, I was honestly happy to shut it down and hit the uninstall button. We had many more games to get to, so I was okay with it. Now, we were up to old school RuneScape, or as I called it back when I initially played it, RuneScape. RuneScape is a fantasy MMO that was originally a browser game built with Java that has since grown to be one of the most popular MMOs to date. Now replaced largely with its standalone C++ client, RuneScape has pulled in the imagination and really cultivated one of the strongest fan bases within the genre. Now, I was no stranger to RuneScape, so when I booted it up this last year, I wasn't going in completely blind. But unlike its popularity within its huge fan base, I feel like it just never really drew me in like it did the others. I don't know exactly why this is, but I think I was still just so wrapped up in Anarchy Online that I never really gave it a fair shot, and by the time I would have circled back to it, it was already in its awkward growth stages, where it was kind of trying to expand and grow, but the old school re-release wasn't quite out yet. So needless to say, I was pretty excited to check it out and see what it had in store for me. We hopped on and quickly knocked out the tutorial area, which is seeming to be more commonplace among all of the MMOs I played, and a welcome feature for games that are notorious for having steep new player learning curves. We chopped down some trees, fished up some shrimp, and crafted ourselves armor and weapons. Similar to my experience in Anarchy Online, I saw many players from RuneScape hopping in my stream and giving me different tips and tricks as I was getting my footing in the game. RuneScape has always been a bit of an enigma for me, as graphically and mechanically, the game seems like an amateur title at best, but there's something charming about its Monty Python-esque humor and immersive world. After completing all the quests I had the time for, I found that this was probably the best MMO to play while binging my other YouTube videos or Netflix maybe. You could even play it on your phone, so waiting rooms and the like would be great for getting your skills up. It just lacked, for me at least, some sense of deeper immersion, given the dated graphics, feature set, and just overall mechanics. Now I know the RuneScape is a huge, very rabid fan base, so don't crucify me for saying that. What the game did for me was add survival elements to an MMORPG, allowing what has more commonly become known as life skills to be the centerpiece of the game and not just hunting monsters deep within a dungeon. This focus of life skills for me was the beginning of blurring the lines between MMO, RPG, survival, strategy, simulation, and a future of meshing other genres into the MMO game genre, something we would see happening much more often only a decade later. The next day we continued onward to another MMORPG that would focus on the sandbox elements and not only focus on dungeon combat. Now, keep in mind, this was another one that I had picked up at a young age and unfortunately has since been taken down and must be played through one of its various yet surprisingly popular private servers. We're of course talking about Star Wars Galaxies. Released on June 26, 2003 to much critical acclaim, it spawned 3 expansions through 2005. The game was completely overhauled in its last expansion, which frustrated many long-term subscribers. Star Wars Galaxies would continue operation for 6 more years after that last expansion. Eventually, it would be shut down only 5 days before its seeming predecessor, Star Wars The Old Republic, of which we will play later on in the series. Star Wars Galaxies to me was always such a fun game because it really truly let you play as just a normal person living in a galaxy far, far away. You could do and be whatever you wanted, whether that was a humble crafter who would work in the moisture farms, a dancer providing buffs to others, a spy or bounty bounty hunter, or even just a Jedi. You could do and be whatever you wanted to be. It was really one of the most immersive experiences I've really ever had in any MMORPG to date. Stepping back into the game these many years later, I was happy to see such an active private server community, but couldn't help being a little bit saddened by modern MMOs and their lack of feeling like the world itself was important. No longer did we spend time just getting to know the world, its inhabitants, or spending time in town just meeting cool new people. Instead, we hopped from dungeon to dungeon, min-maxing the fun out of the games. It kind of bummed me out. I don't want to harp on it too much and for too long because it's all been said before. But Star Wars Galaxies really reminded me of what could have been and what I felt was lacking from the more modern MMO gaming experience. After Star Wars Galaxies, we moved on to another sci-fi MMORPG. Personally, I remember EVE Online being huge when I was deep in the trenches of World of Warcraft: The Burning Crusade. While in college, I would skip class to play WoW, while my roommate would skip to play EVE Online. We would both try our hardest to get the other person to play each other's favorite games, oftentimes getting into heated arguments about why the other's game sucked and ours was so much better. Well, Kevin, EVE Online is still a terrible space simulator MMO. That said, EVE Online did add a lot of cool things and show what was possible for emergent gameplay in the genre. For those unaware, emergent gameplay refers to complex situations in video games, board games, or tabletop role-playing games that emerge from the interaction of relatively simple game mechanics. For EVE, that meant that while the game was simple, the players themselves would get involved in somewhat year-long feuds and wars, smuggling and fighting each other. Something that I would read about in game journalism, but really never got to experience on my own. Playing the game for the 5 hours I spent on it made me feel like I was wasting my time. I knew these immersive events were gone now and that the player base was dwindling. I felt like I was playing a stock market simulator and any charm the game may have had was gone. Not to mention the fact that EVE strays away from the standard $14.99 sub fee and chose to opt for a $20 a month bonus premium sub. It really felt to me, at least, that they were holding on to their diehard player base by the throat, milking them for anything that they had, knowing that they just wouldn't quit this game because of the time they've invested into it. I can see how this game may have influenced some future titles, but to be honest, at the end of the day, the game still sucks, Kevin. And that wraps up the first part of our 3-part series. On the next episode, we're going to look at the era of World of Warcraft, its rise to success, as well as the multitude of clones and WoW killers that would come after. We will continue searching for my love of the genre. So if you're enjoying this series and are not already subscribed, please hit the sub button down below. It's completely free and really the only thing that brings me any sense of happiness anymore. So with all that said, my name is Spun, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace!